It could be the Russians, who are being increasingly indiscriminate with artillery. And remember, on day 3 of the war, they hit a radiation containment unit at Chernobyl. Or it could be once the Ukrainians fall, sometime between probably 3 and 6 months from now, that the Ukrainian partisans will deliberately go out and savage any infrastructure that they don't see as benefiting Ukraine, that they see as benefiting the Russian occupiers. So all of these flows are going away, as are these. The Yamal-Europe pipeline is the largest natural gas pipeline the Russians have, goes through Belarus. And then the Druzhba is the largest oil pipeline they have, and it goes just north of the border. The Brotherhood line is right there as well. That's the second largest natural gas pipeline. They're all going down. This is not suitably insulated from Ukraine. The partisans will be able to reach that. It's entirely possible that there will be a Ukrainian move to bomb these pipelines even before Ukraine properly falls. In total, you are talking about, of the westward flows that go to Europe, the European space, somewhere around 5 million barrels per day, and somewhere between 8 and 10 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas is just going to stop. Now, the problem, in addition to that, is that the Russians are not very good at turning things off. At the end of the Soviet period, when the industrial demand in Russia collapsed, the oil and the natural gas output didn't. Now, there were pipelines going to the west, and those kept operating at full capacity, but they couldn't take away everything that was being produced in the fields. So eventually stuff had to be shut in with the fields. We're talking here about trunk lines that are in excess of 3,000 miles. And when you're dealing with Western Siberian permafrost, if you shut down a well and it freezes, it becomes very, very difficult to reopen that well, assuming you can do it at all. So from the point we have a shutdown, and with only 80 million barrels of storage in all of Russia, we're talking about maybe this happening this month, certainly next month. The Russians are going to have to shut in their production. The last time they did this, it took them 32 years to bring it all back online. Pipes had to be tested, pipes had to be replaced, new wells had to be drilled. We're talking about a fundamental removal of Russia from global energy this year, in the first half of this year. The last men standing are going to be these two pipelines in gray. You've got the Baltic system known as Nord Stream 1, not to be confused with Nord Stream 2, and then the Turk Stream, or the Blue Stream, in the south. The reason these are the last ones that will be operating is they go directly to fields, they go directly to customers, they don't transit any third countries, and they're going to be difficult for partisans to attack, both because of their distance and because they go undersea. So unless sanctions specifically target these two projects, they're going to last. Now, you're talking about a minority of the natural gas that makes it into Europe. And there have already been protests and pressure on German companies to shut down Nord Stream 1. The Germans are saying Nord Stream 1 is nothing like Nord Stream 2, which is, of course, asinine. It's exactly like Nord Stream 2. It's doing exactly what it was supposed to, provide a bypass around Ukraine. But unless the government chooses to shut this down, this will stay open. Okay. The vast majority of Russian crude, no matter where it's coming from, does go to refineries in either Europe or Turkey. And when I say Europe, I'm including the United Kingdom in that. Right now, we're seeing a spreads of $7 to $10 a barrel difference, with Urals being at a discount versus everybody else. The CPC blend out of Tengiz is going at a $3 to $4 discount. And we're seeing large-scale demand increases out of the Persian Gulf as the locals, the Europeans, are trying to get crude from somewhere else. There's going to be a debate held in Europe here very soon, certainly within a couple of weeks, as they realize there's just not enough. You remove 5 million barrels of Russian crude from the market, and there is not that kind of spare capacity in the world. There hasn't been since the 90s. You're talking years to fill that back in. So at some point, as this becomes very, very real for the Europeans, there's going to have to be a conversation about whether we can suck it up or not. from an ethical point of view, from a strategic point of view, all arrows in Europe are pointing to sucking it up. And, if you had asked me about this 2 weeks ago, I would have laughed. But the invasion has done more to focus European minds than Hitler did during his initial invasions of places like the Czech Republic. Okay. Yeah, that's it for that one. We can always come back to this map during Q&A if you need to. Okay, players. First and most importantly, BP. BP entered into a joint partnership with a company that used to be known as TNK back in the early 2000s, and it has since then been the single largest investor into the Russian system ever since. TNK over the years was folded into Rosneft, which is the Russian state oil company. It's the single largest oil company in the world after the Saudis. Now, Rosneft is famous for incompetence when it comes to technical operations. Most of the money has come from BP. Most of the sales have gone to BP. Most of the work has been done by BP, and most of the technology has come from BP. And last week, or earlier this week, I'm sorry, my time is all over the place. I haven't gotten a lot of sleep in 8 days. BP was the first major investor to call it quits and say they're going to leave. Now, that will not generate an instant production fall, but on average, foreign companies, Western companies specifically, operating in Russia are probably responsible for producing and maintaining half of all of Russian output. So even if the pipes don't have a problem, even if crude tankers do keep coming, even if the Europeans never even if the Europeans never sanction the Russians, even if the protests stop, even if the partisans never target infrastructure, we are still looking at Russian output falling by roughly half. The question is the time frame, and that's going to vary greatly project to project. But as a rule, if the project was brought online in the last 10 years, the Russians had no idea how to do it, because those are going to be deeper fields, smaller fields, more remote fields, more technically challenging fields. So this output build that we have seen over the last 15 years, the vast majority of that is because of BP. It's also because of the 3 companies at the bottom. The services firms, excuse me, are not covered by the sanctions, and at present, none of the 3 have decided to pull out. I expect this to be the next big target for American sanctions specifically. Biden has made it very clear and very public that his goal is to destroy Russia as an energy superpower. And as long as these 3 companies are operating there, that will not happen. All 3 companies look to the United States more than they look to Europe. So if the Americans do start pressuring the